run the ghosting an image tutorial here, step by step. And we have here an image taken in Strobe Lab. This is Miss Kelsey. You will need a Strobe Lab image to do this tutorial, so you'll need to have one of those shot. Miss Kelsey graduated a few years back. I'm sure she won't mind us using her image. Okay, so step one, after we load our image up, is to duplicate this layer. There's a couple ways we can do that. You guys know you can drag the image to the new layer icon and duplicate it, or the tutorial has you to use Command Option J. So if you hold down Command Option and J, it makes a new layer from the background layer, and we're going to call it desaturated. And we're calling this desaturated because we're going to desaturate or take all the color out of this layer. Okay, and there's again a couple ways we can desaturate this. You can go Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and you can pull all the color out with the saturation slider. That will work. Or the tutorial has you going Command Shift U. So hold down Command, hold down Shift, and hold down U, and that also desaturates or pulls all the color out of that layer. Okay, so that's step two, finishing up. Step three, it's having us to copy the desaturated layer. Okay, so again, you can drag it down here and make a copy of it. It has us name this motion blur. So there's motion blur. And we're going to apply a motion blur filter to this to give it kind of a ghosted look. So we've got our desaturated, our original background, our desaturated, and our motion blur layer. So on the motion blur layer, we're going to go to Filter, we're going to go to Blur, and we're going to go to Motion Blur. And the motion blur filter has a little preview image here for us to look at. It has the angle. That's the angle that the motion blur is going to go in. We want to set that to 0, so it's left to right. And I think I'm going to go about 260 there. About 260, 270 is good because this is a higher resolution image than the one in the tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that. So we now have our motion blur. The tutorial says he set his for 95, but I set mine for 260 to get the same effect. Okay, we've got our blur, our motion blur created. So we've got all three of these layers. We've got the background, the desaturated, and the blurred layer with the motion blur on it. Step number 5 has us adding a layer mask to the motion blur. So we're going to click right here. We're going to add a layer mask. Okay, so the layer mask pops up. And we can use some black on the layer mask. I'm going to go ahead and run my opacity up fully. I think I want the eyes to show through fully. And then we can either use a 50% gray or we can use black and we can drop the opacity. And by dropping the opacity, we don't get full black, so we kind of get the sort of the weird effect on the nose and the eyes where you can still see some of that layer through the blurred layer. And I kind of like that. That's where I want it to be. I want the eyes, I want them to be all the way clear so we can see them, and then the rest of the features and some of the hair, not quite so much. There we go. Okay, so I dropped my opacity to give it sort of this look here on those last few marks I made. Okay, now we're going to merge all these layers onto a new layer. So we can do what the tutorial says. We can do Shift Command Option E, and that's a lot. Shift Option Command E. And what that does is it squeezes all three of these layers into one new layer that has them all. And what that does for us is it keeps these layers intact. So if we want to go back and change something like the layer mask, we can do that. Or you can do this the other way. You can just flatten the image right here, like so. If you flatten the image, it does the same thing. It squeezes all the layers into one layer, but you don't have the old layers to go back to, like I do here. Okay? So that was Shift, Command, Option, and E. That's a lot to hold down at one time, I know, but it works. It gives you one new layer with all the old layers squeezed into it. So we'll do it that way. And on this layer, we're going to apply a diffuse glow filter. That's up under filters, and it's under distort, and it's diffuse glow. And this gives it kind of an eerie, sort of overexposed look. And there's the look it's going to give it. The amounts it asked you to put in were graininess to 3, glow amount to 10, clear amount to 10. I've done that. They work for me. Okay. And now we're going to move on to step 9. I have this layer. I'm going to go ahead and name this merged because it is all the layers merged together. And we're going to add a new solid layer, a new solid color layer here, and that is here. And solid color, it's going to put that layer on top. The tutorial asks us to pick some kind of eerie, like green color. And then we're going to put this layer, the blending mode of this layer, remember our blending modes right here, into color. Okay, and if we put it in color, it colorizes everything from that layer down. So if you wanted to do like a different color, that's fine. You can experiment, play with different colors. But the idea here is you're creating kind of this creepy, ghosted looking portrait. Okay? So there it is, and that's the tutorial. I'm going to lower the opacity of this so it doesn't hit this as hard. See how it's really coloring that hard. So I'm going to go ahead and drop its opacity down some. There we go. About 11 or 15% should be fine. That's kind of got it. So that is our ghosting a tutorial, or ghosting a portrait tutorial.